Hey, it's Halloween month. Now, usually in the olden days, I would start a Halloween-themed video by saying, "Welcome, children of the net," with this silly twat voice. Jeez, okay, thanks for that.
Some organ music.
Right, production value, mwah, the chef's kiss. Would you like to take the reign and introduce us, Mr. Count Matti Man?
This show of terrible terror is hosted by Madhog the Master.
Hey, that's me!
The master of frights and sights in the Transylvania site, and I'm his humble guest, Count Hedonistic Actor, from the land of, well, not Transylvania, but we all sound like we were from Transylvania. People of angst and mood of most darkest of intentions.
So you do agree that this kind of openings really make you sound like a silly twat, then? I would like you to know that I really appreciate the triple rhyme you pulled off earlier. And by pulled off, I mean not at all, but I still appreciate it. That's nice. Anyway, as I said at the beginning, this is the Halloween month themed podcast that I decided on the spur of the moment to chuck towards the general direction of both you, the audience, and my co-host here, Matti Mali, or Count Matryoshki, I guess. Count Matryoshka, how about that?
Matryoshka.
It sounds bad. And I should feel bad. The title of this podcast is The Top 10 Scary Moments from Non-Horror Video Games. And I think we need to have a bit of a preamble to properly introduce this topic, because everybody does a scary top 10 list in October. Everybody does that. It's a dance that goes on since the beginning of time or the internet, whichever. Or MTV, if you will. Now, this isn't exactly an original idea, but we thought we could make it a bit more interesting and challenging for ourselves by listing up scary video game moments from games that are traditionally not regarded as scary with a W. So no scary spoopy games this Halloween. You can cast out into the ether all of your Silent Hills and Resident Evils, or Amnesia the Dark Descent, if you will. Your favorite RPG horror game is not going to make it into this list. Instead, we're going to make a list about what we subjectively thought was a scary experience in an otherwise unexpectedly scary environment. I used the adjective in the broadest way possible. It could be anything from a surprise startle that has stuck with you because you were a child and you were not expecting it, to a much more morose, disturbing, unsettling, atmospheric scene. Again, this is about scary moments in non-horror games. On top of that, both me and Matti here, we have done our own separated lists independent of each other, and we did not compare notes. So there is a possibility, however minute, that we might come across the same entry for this list in a different position. Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun, I said.
Yeah!
Jesus, okay, too much enthusiasm. This is scary Halloween spoopy month, just tone it down a notch.
Well, there have to be jump scares for the audience.
I tried to avoid jump scares, cheap tricks like that for my list. But there are some entries that had to be there inevitably because of how much they have affected me as I grew up. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to find a couple of those in your list as well. And on that note, I think we should get started with our number 10 of this top 10 list. Who should go first? Okay, so I'm going to go first for this one, and then you go second, and then in the next entry, you're going to go first, and then I'm going to go second, so on and so forth until the end. Is it agreeable with you?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Alright, so number 10 for Madhog. Special effects, please. Thank you. My first entry in this list, or I should say my 10th entry in this list, is a bit of an academic inclusion, if you will. Let me explain. This is the most recent entry in this list, if only because it's from a game that I've only played for the first and only time last year. The game itself is not recent at all, but I've only played it for the first time last year. Have you ever heard of a little Nippon Ichi title, The Witch and the 100 Knight?
The name sounds familiar.
You might have seen my ostensive tweeting about it last year. The very existence of this title is truly scandalous and outrageous. The company Nippon Ichi, for context, are the people who developed and published the Disgaea games, which, as you know, I happen to be a fan, perhaps against my better judgment, indubitably against my better judgment. And there is a good chance that if you've ever played a Disgaea game, you might have not known that they also make other games that are not Disgaea. And those games usually tend to die in obscurity. Such is the case with The Witch and the 100 Knight, a game that I cannot recommend to a single soul, a game that, if I had a time machine, I would go back in time and prevent myself from playing, but at the same time I'm also glad I played it, because it is such a uniquely awful experience. Weird and bizarre experience in its own league, really, that it is almost incomparable to anything else you might ever try in your entire life. I am not exaggerating here. This is a content warning about literally everything. I knew I had something quote-unquote special in my hands as soon as Chapter 1 of this game ended and the so-called protagonist used her magic, because she's a witch, you see, to transform her mother figure into a mouse, and then summon a bunch of other mice to rape her as a mouse. Yes, and that was just the end of Chapter 1. And it never lets up from that point onward.
I definitely haven't heard about this.
Yes, and you definitely shouldn't. If you're a good Christian child, you should stay away from the evil witch. Let me tell you. It's tricky to place this game into this list because most of it isn't really scary. Not in the traditional sense. If this were to be a list of the top 10 most shocking and gross moments in video games, then The Witch and the 100 Knight would occupy all of it, and then some. I would need a top 20, really.
So is this the same kind of story goes downhill from here, kind of the twist like in Wada no Hara?
I think the story actually gets better from there, but getting to the point in which it is better is such a profoundly devastating emotional hurdle, and that's the reason why I cannot recommend it.
I didn't mean worse as in quality-wise, but as in content-wise.
That point at the beginning is the lowest possible point from which to get better, so it isn't saying much. I was legitimately invested by the end of it, but again, getting to that point, there were so many obstacles, so many gross and disturbing moments to sip through, so to speak. And because the journey was such a psychological malcontent, then the final boss, the true final boss right at the end, just felt like the icing on the cake of that pile of offal. And thus, here's my official entry for number 10, finally, the true final boss from The Witch and the 100 Knight. And this is how she looks like. Yeah! I'm sharing it in the chat of Discord for Matti to see her. So, describe to me what you see in this picture.
So I'm seeing, I suppose, a feminine face, one green eye and one red eye, and the red eye is bleeding, and there's a huge scar under it, and her hair apparently consists of streams of blood, and there are other eyes tangled among the hair-like substance as well.
Did somebody say Resident Evil meets Dark Souls? Here you go. So, this picture, this steel picture, does not do justice to this monster. You have to see her move. Because her hair, which you so professionally described, make her move like a spider. Like a creepy, crawly spider. So, this is a bit disturbing, and I guess that qualifies as a scary moment for this top 10. So, there you go.
In my top 10, the 10th one is from Life is Strange. For those who don't know, it's this coming-of-an-age story about this girl who suddenly gets powers to
Rewind
travel.
time.
Yeah. Its 5th and final chapter, well, it's already rather stress-inducing. And in the end, when she is trying to go to the place where she could make this chaos back to normal, she faints and...
You feel like totally haunted by the eyes of those sad mothers and children.
She saw humanity as tortured, right?
What's going on?
And frankly, it's bullshit.
Nobody even cares?
Keep that to yourself. Seriously, though, I could frame any one of you in a dark corner and capture you in a moment of desperation.
Everybody's gone now.
When I played it, my interpretation of the following events was that because of her abuse of the power, the reality just couldn't handle it no longer and collapsed, because there's this kind of a nightmare sequence where she jumps from place to place, and it's kind of different characters and events make no sense. And I've heard later that it was supposed to be some kind of a dream sequence, but at the moment I thought that the reality had actually collapsed and she was now trying to go through the chaos. And
so it is a disturbing, unsettling, waking nightmare sort of scene.
Yeah.
From Life is Strange, episode 5. I find that dream sequences, particularly nightmare sequences in video games, tend to be, generally speaking, very effective, on the premise that you actually have to interact and navigate through them. The level of interaction really makes the difference.
I wasn't aware that it was a dream sequence, or...
So in essence, it took you by surprise twice as much because of that. Alright, it's time for number 9. Whee! Pew, 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 pew! Special effects, pew, 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 production value, etc., etc. It's your time to go first.
Okay, yeah, my 9th one is a classic one from Earthbound, the final battle against Gygas.
Yes, that is a legitimately spooky sequence. If I had played Earthbound, no doubt it would have found its place in my list as well.
Yeah, well, basically, in order to defeat this threat that has become the embodiment of fear itself, you first have to travel back in time, in the ancient times, and you have to move your consciousness to robot bodies in order to survive the time travel. And you walk through this foggy, empty place where this creepy music, and then you enter the cave where is the... what was the name? Devil's Machine. Then the minion opens the hatch and Gygas shows itself.
Whatever that itself may be, because what's really powerful and potent about Gygas' appearance is that it doesn't quite have a traditional physical form. It's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. A pure, concentrated, abstract body horror that haunts your entire screen. That is quite, as we say, spoopy.
In this game, he became this something that you cannot grasp through form. He gets power by eating people's fear, and if he feared the protagonist, then it means that he ate his own brain and became the almighty idiot that cannot control himself anymore.
Ah, Carbuncle ate itself.
Yeah.
Okay, as far as my pick for number 9, the dream sequences from Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods, an indie darling from 2017, is a game that means a lot to me. And to properly understand why the dream sequences, or indeed the entire game, have had such an impact on me, you would have to understand the kind of headspace I was in at the time. Let's just say, in the vaguest way possible, that I happen to relate a bit too hard with the main character, May Borowski, and what she was going through, her issues, her hang-ups, her anxieties, her existential dread, that which the game works as a backdrop. And the dream sequences serve to properly explore, allegorically explore those issues and anxieties. They are mostly disturbing and slightly unnerving, because you find yourself into these dark voids that slowly take recognizable shapes in architecture, and they all tend to culminate with a gigantic animal in the background, emerging, turning into stars, which is open to interpretation, of course. An interpretation is that those animals could represent the people she knows in real life. And the last one, whom is introduced to her as God, is herself. It's a game full of little moments and memorable scenes such as that. And to add to what I said earlier about how dream sequences can be powerful in the hands of an interactive medium such as video games, Night in the Woods is a fine example of just that. Number 8! The dream sequences from Max Payne!
Oh yeah.
We have a bit of a leitmotif going on here. You had your dream sequences from Life is Strange. I have my dream sequences from both Night in the Woods and, of course, Max Payne. Yes.
Well, it did get into my top 10, but it is rather high in my overall listing.
Yes, we'll get to the special mentions later on, Matti. We will valorize your hard work. Don't worry about it. But. Pats you on the head. I do believe that the nightmares in Max Payne, which served as a sort of narrative in-between for the various other action scenes, they are in this list primarily because they, I believe, are my first ever experience with scary dream sequences in a video game. And as such, it is a formative experience. Max Payne, of course, was to video games what John Wick currently is for films. It is the story of a man drowning in grief and guilt that takes it out to literally every man alive. So there is a lot of shooting and killing and more killing and shooting for this man dead set on revenge. Because
I haven't seen John Wick, but isn't that more comedic in nature? Or
oh no! No. You are confused, my friend. John Wick is fun, very well choreographed and action-packed, but it's an otherwise very dour experience that serves as a metaphor for grieving.
Okay.
Watch it, by the way. So Max Payne was John Wick before John Wick. in many ways, except that this is more about guilt rather than grief in general, because the aforementioned nightmare sequences are about Max Payne's survivor's guilt and inability to save his family before they get killed by the two drug addicts that invaded his home. And the less I say about the entire plot of Max Payne, the better, because upon scrutiny, it isn't that good.
Yeah, it's so confusing. Just too many moving pieces in.
But I do like the center piece of the game, and by extension the series, because it is about analyzing the pain, the Max Payne, if you will, of a man dealing with his trauma and grief and guilt over the death of his family. And to this game's credit, for 2001, when it came out, it did go the extra mile, and the dream sequences represent that extra mile. They are atmospheric, they are unsettling, they give you this sense of impotency, of powerlessness, as you navigate yourself on top of that labyrinthine blood platform. There are those moments when you run atop a thin line of blood that intersecates itself and becomes a labyrinth, and at any point in time you can just fall off of it and literally die in the video game.
That was mechanically annoying.
That was really, really annoying, and especially when you have to do it more than 1 or 2 times. But the first time that happens, its impact cannot be denied, because we are still talking about it to this day.
Yeah.
What about you?
My 8th one is from Portal.
Hold on, were you traumatized by the lack of cake?
Yeah, it was the moment when Shell finds out that the cake is a lie.
Really?
I mean, it is the kind of in the context of the game, and
yes, because out of context, it's just a meme that has been done to death.
Well, those who don't know, Portal is about this woman named Shell who is trapped in kind of a research lab that is controlled by this crazy, sarcastic AI, GLaDOS. And,
GLaDOS, a science lab, also known as Aperture Science.
Yeah, she missed to test this Portal device, and in one of the later testing chambers, she can find this hole in the wall, and she can go in there and notice that get kind of a peek behind the curtains, so to speak. She can find out this smaller room where someone has written that the cake that GLaDOS has promised to be in the end of this whole testing room by is a lie, and then this creepy music starts to play, and it kind of underlines that things may not be as they seem. And this is enhanced later when GLaDOS's true derangedness is revealed. And first Portal is surprisingly intense experience. I mean, at least when I first played it back in 2007 in one sitting.
It's a rather short game.
Yeah.
It doesn't overstate its welcome, that's good. I'm still thinking about that small optional scene from Portal 2 when you might or might not accidentally bring the little turret with you into the portal and see it disintegrate in front of your eyes. That still makes me cry. So there is something to be said about how effective Portal can be in crafting memorable video game moments. Still, I was not expecting the cake is a lie from you in this list.
I felt that GLaDOS wasn't that good in the second game. She just became this kind of a petty whiner.
Honestly, GLaDOS is good regardless because she's a lot of fun.
Yeah, her lines are memorable.
Right. Let's go down to number 7. Pew, 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 pew.
So my number 7 is from Grandia 2. And,
I played that recently.
Oh yeah, it's Ira Space. remember that place?
I think I do. Was it in the quote-unquote Berserk Lost Children arc that they lifted from the manga and adapted into the video game? It's the one with all the eyes, correct?
Yes, it's the eyes.
I know that one.
In this game, you are with your bunch of anime characters looking for the pieces of this god of evil Valamar, who was vanquished eons ago, and pieces can possess people. Before this village, they have already met a guy who was possessed by Valamar's stomach. And
stomach? You mean stomach, right?
Yeah, stomach. And one of their team members is possessed by the wings of Valamar. Melancholic atmosphere when you enter. Medieval style melancholy music plays in there. And then there's this little girl, the title Ira, who is possessed by the eyes of Valamar, and she can enter in people's dreams. And
yet another entry in this list that's about dreams. But basically you're placing that into this list because the environment is spooky.
Yeah, in order to get rid of the eye, you have to travel in Ira's mind, and
you have to pull a Psychonauts.
Well, the first it doesn't look so bad. Well, the music is kind of a creepy music box thing. Ding, 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 ding. First, there's just clouds and pillars and stuff, but further you go, then the landscape turns into more lava and blood and ice everywhere.
It is a respectfully disturbing environment, to be sure.
Yeah.
They had to go all out for it to be effective, otherwise it wouldn't be the best arc in the entire video game.
Yeah, fear effect is kind of mitigated when you go to random battles and there starts that upper da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But
it completely rearranges the mood and gives you a tonal whiplash, as they say.
Well, at least it culminates in the hardest boss battle in the game against the Eyes of Valamar. And the music that goes with the pieces of Valamar is a good one. Dramatic.
So for my number 7, I have here The Sorrow from Metal Gear Solid 3.
I am the sorrow. Like you, I too am filled with sadness. This world is one of sadness. Battle brings death. Death brings sorrow. The living may not hear them. Their voices may fall upon deaf ears. But make no mistake, the dead are not silent. Now you will know the sorrow of those whose lives you have ended.
Snake Eater! So I played all the mainline Metal Gear Solid games from 1 until number 4, and then I quit the series forever and I never looked back, and for the longest time I felt like I've wasted hours of my life with this series. Let me be completely and utterly frank with you. I respect Hideo Kojima for being a man with a vision, an uncompromising vision, an auteur, if you will, and I do resonate with what he's trying to say throughout the entire series. That commentary about the
nature of war?
Not just the nature of war in the broadest way possible. Any so-and-so can do that. He was denouncing and lambasting the industrial military complex, and how war veterans and soldiers are basically a expendable class that gets used up and then abandoned for the sake of expanding a military empire, moving the money. Capitalism is bad. War is bad because the industry behind it makes it happen. So there is a lot there that I agree on a fundamental political level. But I still don't like him as a writer. And I still don't like him as a video game designer. Because his video game ideas are some of the most obnoxious and annoying things possible. I do not need to remind you about his 8 hours long cutscenes. And I certainly do not need to remind you about certain moments as the end boss fight, which is, to say that it's annoying would be euphemistical. But then you have the sequence with the sorrow. Something that happens, I'm using so many quotation marks, in the midst of Metal Gear Solid 3. You have to slowly walk towards the ghost man that's basically summoning other ghosts to get you, so to speak, but you cannot move fast because you are both wounded and you are inside water. So you have to find a way to avoid them as they come towards you. It's a lot more morose when you get to this scene yourself, more so than I am describing to you right now, because, again, I am done with this series, emotionally and psychologically. Let's get to number 6.
Squeak, squeak!
Have you played any of the Paper Mario RPGs, by the way?
No. Mario and Luigi games.
Alright, well, I personally have played Super Paper Mario on the Nintendo Wii, which was the only one of the bunch that was not a turn-based RPG. It was a platformer with a 2D to 3D gimmick to it, and it was fine, for what I remember. Of course, it's Mario, so there is an obligatory spooky level. You know, usually where all the boos are. Haunted Mansion. The boss for the area, I believe, is called Mimi. Or was it Lily? I can't recall at this point, but I do recall what her boss form looks like. Because you see, Mimi presents herself as this little cute cubic girl until she breaks her neck and her head goes upside down and spider legs come out of it, and it's a giant spider nightmare.
Yeah, I've seen the sequence. That neck snap sound is rather unsettling.
It is very upsetting, I have to tell you. So, the spider nightmare boss from Super Paper Mario is my number 6 top scary moment from a non-horror video game. No further context is required. It's a spider boss.
So my number 6 is from Terranigma. Are you familiar with the game?
Not at all. Not in the slightest.
Well, there's this thing called Quintet Trilogy, which is made by people in this developer firm Quintet because of their similar mechanics. It includes Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and this third one, Terranigma. And its idea is that the hero named Ark is living in this kind of an underground world because the world above is kind of closed, and he needs to free them in order to prevent the Dark Gaia taking control or something.
That sounds like the premise for Gurren Lagann.
Yeah. Well, in Terranigma, whilst he travels through all kind of castles and fights all kind of bosses in several places, he wakes up the elements of the world one by one. First continents and sea, and then plants, animals, and stuff. And whenever those are awakened, this kind of scene that shows all kind of green luxury, and there's this harmonious music that rings to the mood, blah blah blah. And then comes turn to wake up humans. When he defeats the boss that allows humans to be awakened, there's this very pressing music, and there's this sequence where Ark kind of walks in a void or some kind of thing, sees an innocent creature and just flatly kills it. So this kind of a principal impression that humans have something different than other species in this planet. They are somehow more sinister and stuff.
So essentially this is about the horror of humanity. So essentially reawakening humanity was a bad idea. Humanity was asleep for a reason.
Yeah, there are bad humans among them, but most of them are okay.
Hashtag not all humans.
Yeah, and there's the kicker. The consequence of this action is that he falls into coma for like 3 years, and once he wakes up, he's in this human village he's taken care of and goes to his travel, and that's like the half point of the game. The rest of the half is to awaken certain technologies the humans once knew how to do and kind of build their society into.
Okay, but to summarize, the scary moment in question has to do with
resurrection of humanity.
And the reason why it's scary?
Yeah, because it's the sequence that shows the resurrection is very different from the sequences that happened before. When animals awakened, for example, or birds, there was this harmonious music. They go frolicking their ways and all harmony and all that. And when
but the moment humans are awake again, oh no, the end of times.
When Ark awakened humans, he lost his ability to talk with animals. He can no longer understand them for the rest of the game. And that kind of hit me. I related to him so hard because his friend circle practically changed immediately.
I am missing the context for this, obviously. I'm sure it will all make more sense once I get to see the clip that you will no doubt be sending to me. You will be sending to me all the clips from your list, because there is too much material for me to look up otherwise.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, by the way.
Yeah, but I recommend playing the game. It's kind of this from a 1995 Super Nintendo game. It's an action role-playing game, and it's rather solid.
Okay, interesting. Where are we? Number 5?
Yeah.
Number 5, baby! Yes! You go.
Okay, so my number 5 is from Final Fantasy VII.
Of course.
It's Sephiroth's Start of Darkness, the whole sequence where we go in the flashback when Cloud after they have...
Okay, you don't even need to describe the scene to me. I know the scene. Everybody knows the scene. Sephiroth goes cray-cray, burns the village down. You see him surrounded by flames, and then he's in the big chamber with his quote-unquote mother, monologuing like a cray-cray man. Did I miss anything?
When he bursts the village and is in a mist of flames, he looks at Cloud and smiles, and then walks away.
That would be creepy if it wasn't such a overplayed scene in many ways.
Yeah. Once you experience it, even in context of a scary moments.
My only problem is that I've only played Final Fantasy VII the first time in my adult life, and that scene, by that point, had already been spoiled to me. Just like the death of Ares.
Yeah.
So naturally, it didn't quite have the same effect as anyone else who grew up playing this game, because internet culture was even more careless with spoilers back then than it is now.
And spoil the character's death.
Yes, that's the worst thing anybody could ever spoil to you.
Yeah, her death when it happened didn't affect me that much. It affected when Cloud traveled to the next village and we finally found out where she had come from. And it just was crushing to know that she was so close of getting to know what her past was. But
that's rough, buddy.
yeah.
My number 5 is a weird one, if I say so myself. We are entering into the territory of the formative scares. Do you know about the game Zork, The Underground Empire?
I have heard of the title.
It's a legendary text adventure from 1980, 1981, somewhere around then. There was an attempt to reboot the series as a graphic adventure game in 1993, I believe. The game was titled Return to Zork. Bah, 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 goes the soundtrack. It's supposed to be an epic fantasy adventure, but, well, let's just say these were the early days of FMV games, that very short-lived trend in which they would use real actors in blue screen or green screen environments. So you can imagine how this game looked, again, if you would scrutinize it with your modern eyes. However, when this game came out in 1993, I was but a wee lad, so I played a demo of this game. There is this moment right at the start in which you are reintroduced to the world of Zork, except it is no longer a text adventure. Now there are graphics, you can actually see the abandoned, boarded up house, and you can actually see the mailbox with items within it. And you can open the mailbox, and inside the mailbox, a man greets you through a sphere. But before this man, inside the sphere, inside the mailbox, can finish his greeting,
Ah, the sweepstakes winner. I've been looking forward to... No! No!
help! Then the camera zooms into his mouth, and then dan, 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 you are transported via hard-hitting soundtrack into the beginning of the game proper. Now, this doesn't sound too scary, but imagine being a small child, an easily scared child such as I was, and this man just yells into your face, you go inside his mouth, and you are transitioned into the opening act of the game as the soundtrack goes as hard as it possibly can. You are most likely to remember that for a long time, and that is exactly what happened to me. So on my notes here, I wrote down Return to Zork, column, help! 3 exclamation marks. That's the long and short of it. My number 5, everybody. I was spooked by Return to Zork. But you see, now it gets even better because this segues perfectly into number 4. My number 4 entry for this list, which is from yet another obscure adventure game. A game titled Lighthouse, the Dark Being. Do you know about that one?
Lighthouse the Dark Being.
It's a Myst clone. And I'm not even being coy here. This was actually described as a Myst clone. It was the intent behind Sierra, which, as you know, were the premier adventure game publishers back in 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
This is a game from 1996, by the way. If Zork represented the early days of FMV, this one represented the early days of digital polygonal characters. Again, it doesn't look great. It's 1996. Anyway, so this entry specifically is about the titular dark being. And I am slightly cheating on this entry because there is a prologue to this game that very much feels like a horror game, because there is a obscure, sinister presence that gets summoned into this dimension because of some scientist doing sciencey things inside the titular lighthouse where he lives, and you see this scene, and he happens to have a baby girl that's left alone in her crib. And you see this shadow quite literally overshadowing the small baby inside the crib, and she yells in fear. As I said before, this very much was Sierra's attempt to answer Myst, which means it's an odiously cryptic adventure game, the kind that I would not enjoy. I don't like Myst. I most certainly did not enjoy this, but at some point you get to go into the other world and it's more of a dark fantasy-ish story. Regardless, the scary moment in question happens when you, the player, get to the lighthouse. And for the moment, it is just you inside the building and the small baby in the crib. So you feed milk to the baby and then go mind your own business in some of the other rooms, doing basic exploration. Until all of a sudden, completely unprompted, you hear that the baby is starting to cry. So you go back to the room, and what you see is a baby napping monster!
Oh no.
That's what I wrote down here, by the way, in my notes. A baby napping monster! I see this lanky, golem-like creature that takes the baby and then jumps inside an interdimensional portal. And again, upon scrutiny, looking at this with modern eyes, it seems more than a little bit silly. But I was young back then, and this very much had a bit of an impact on me. So that's my entry for number 4. The Dark Being, the baby napping monster from Lighthouse.
Yeah, my number 4 is from Chrono Trigger, Day of Lovers.
Ah, classic.
This huge, spiky bug-like thing raises from Earth. Yep. In the year 1999, and rains destruction upon the world and causes the apocalypse, where in the future humans have to live in shelters because they're just ass raining in the skies.
The future refused to change and all that.
The Day of Lovers is presented either in when the heroes who can travel through time goes to the year 2300 and finds a video of it.
The main characters just happen to fumble upon the threat of Lavos and the main plot purely by happenstance.
Yeah. If Marla hadn't pressed that button, they would have just gone home and lived their lives in happy ignorance.
Yes! Well, as it happens, they received the call for adventure and they answered it. I really like the idea of Lavos, of which I shall not go into for spoiler's sake, because I still want people to play this game. It's still one of the best ever JRPGs, period. One of the only ones who has aged gracefully over the decades. The same cannot be said about literally every Final Fantasy game ever made.
Yeah.
Well, maybe 9. Maybe 9 is still quite good.
What is effective in the Day of Lavos, because it can also be seen if you challenge Lavos and lose a battle against it. And,
yes, you can go challenge Lavos after a certain point in the game. You can go challenge it whenever you want and inevitably die because you're not strong enough.
Yeah, and it shows the whole sequence. I guess one of the first games to show the player what's the consequence of their failure. They get to see how the future refuses to change.
Yes, just like under capitalism.
That's kind of a Lavos scream you can hear.
That was real good. That was really good, and I had a legitimate fright right now. Thanks. That was real good. Sometimes I forget you're a voice actor. Don't ever do that again. Jeez, man. Don't ever do that again. That was so good. I'm going to use that clip. Okay, so we are now smack dabbed into the top 3 of this increasingly more intense list, apparently.
My number 3 is from Mother 3, which is a sequel to Earthbound and the last one in the trilogy. From that game, there were some good options like the trippy mushroom sequence in that one island. And have you played the game, by the way?
No.
Yeah, and then there was the change scene against the Ultimate Chimera. But what I chose was the entire final dungeon, Empire Porky Building, which has the... It kind of shows the scenes that the main villain of the game has done.
You mean Porky?
Yeah.
They had the gall to make Porky. Porky! The main villain. Porky!
Yeah, Porky means as a building where in the lower levels it has several levels in it. Stories or whatever it was.
Levels.
And they were in the beginning, they chose his usual since the experiments he has done with the animals by combining them together, and there are all kind of monsters thingies. And
I just understood what was the main inspiration from a certain sequence from Undertale.
Oh yeah, and there are lots of showcases. You have to play all this kind of a childish game with him because he's basically a man-child and he's immature and mean and asshole. Every layer shows pieces of his personality, his immaturity, his deep greed. The whole building is a monument to anti-intellectualism that Porky is the physical embodiment of, and truly a despicable piece of shit.
You're fighting Donald Trump, is what you're saying to me.
Yeah, Donald Trump who invented time traveling or stuff.
I mean, if he's a monument to anti-intellectualism, I cannot buy him as a scientist. Not even a mad scientist.
Yeah, he has a team of scientists in his payroll.
Okay, now that explains it. Right, so this dungeon, is it a spooky, scary dungeon? Morose, unsettling, disturbing.
Yeah, unsettling, certainly.
It's existentially spooky rather than traditionally spooky.
Man who destroys the lives of thousands just because he was bored.
That hits so close home, that seems perennially topical. That sounds like a perennially topical kind of villainy. One that can be easily found in the real world.
Yeah, the maker has said that Pork is supposed to be the representation of everything that is wrong with humanity or something, the worst aspects of it.
That would be terrifying, once you really think about it. I agree, I have not even seen what this dungeon looks like, and I'm already dreading it, because of that context that you just provided to me. There is nothing more terrifying in this world than the realization that the world is in the hands of greedy, self-centered, fascist douchebags. As for my number 3, here's an entry that I believe some of you might have expected for me to include, because it's from the game Undertale, which I just referenced, by the way, so I love that synergy that's going on here.
Yeah.
Well, Undertale was my Earthbound, just like Earthbound was Toby Fox's, well, Earthbound. Again, one of the main inspirations for Undertale, which to this day it is one of the best and most well put together examples of a metagame that manages to identify the entity of the player in correlation to the gaming world that they interact. And on that note, the easy answer for this entry would have been the genocide route of Undertale. I chose not to put the genocide route of Undertale for my number 3 choice, on the premise that if you choose willingly to play genocide in that game, then it becomes a horror game.
Yeah, I never played the genocide route.
In which the player themselves is the horror. And by doing that, it pulls the rug from under you and it forces you to think about the consequences of your action, of violence, and also your role and responsibility towards your own agency, both in the video game world and in the real world that you actually inhabit. That was really effective, and nothing but misery awaits you should you choose to pursue that, which you will do because you are a gamer, and a gamer has to complete games. So Toby Fox is openly trolling you at this point.
Yeah.
The actual moment that I decided to include in this list is the Flowey boss fight.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Now we're cooking. You get to the end of the neutral route of Undertale. You think you've won the day, and then Flowey transports you into a dark void. He takes control of the video game itself, and then he reveals his horrible, awful form when he's about to fight you, which is this disturbing amalgamation of several semi-photorealistic assets compiled together into shambling body horror, with Flowey's face appearing on a television, flickering in and out with Toby Fox's own face. And then there is that blood-freezing laughter. Can you replicate Flowey's laughter, by the way? I should have never asked. We shall have a bit of a reverb effect on that, and it's perfect. So there is all that, and then the actual fight begins, and it's an hopeless fight at first. You have no idea what you're doing, and the moment you die, because you will inevitably die the first couple of times, before understanding what the actual gimmick of this fight is, the moment that happens, you are kicked out of the game, as in the game closes on you, and you find yourself dumbfounded looking at the screen of your computer. So you go back in, and the same boss fight awaits you again, with the really scary looking boss. So that would be my number 3, and I think a lot of people will agree. This is the first proper scary moment in the game. So, because of that, it's the one that you will remember the most. Flowey was such a nightmare at the time. Of course, at the time, we were yet to realize that the true villain was the player all along. But Flowey, as a representation of the game itself, that doesn't want you to ever stop playing the game, works his magic quite vividly. Let's mosey over the number 2 entry. My number 2 entry, how to put this delicately, It angers me. I am livid and pissed off, angry that this game dared to pull this stunt on me. The Longest Journey, that's the game, and there is a certain creature in that game that really had no business being as traumatizing as it was. Curse you, The Longest Journey. I am talking about, of course, the Gribbler. Do you remember the Gribbler? The witch in the forest.
Yeah, witch in the forest, yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to read to you the notes that I put down on my document here. And I quote, "That mother effing Gribbler piece of S scared the piss out of me, F you."
Longest Journey isn't on my list anywhere. What I remember from the Gribbler moment, I guess my fear towards her was mitigated by the fact that you can die in the confrontation against...
No, Matti, none of that garbage. Nothing about the Gribbler is scary or intimidating in any way, shape, or form, except for that small scene.
I am back with the berries and... What's happened here? Why is the...
You see the Gribbler transforming and just emanating that ear-shattering screech with its bare teeth and bulged-out eyes, screeching its demonic voice. So unexpectedly. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you say. To this day, I still cannot see it without wincing inwardly. And a lot of it has to do with how surprised I was. And again, because the Gribbler herself seemed like such a goofy enemy. You first meet her in the forest, she's pretending to be an old lady who's hurt, and she's not at all going to try and eat you for lunch. But, of course, you know she's going to do that because she keeps on saying accidentally incriminating things. But, you know, you are the player, so you go along with it, and you go into her house, you expect her to come back and trying to be the witch from Hansel and Gretel, which is the reference. What I didn't expect is how she would react upon finding out that I, the player, had liberated some of her prisoners. And it's in that 5-6 seconds long scene that she goes from spooky old lady to nightmare-inducing screaming beast from hell. Again, it was surprising, it was unexpected, and because of that, I still cannot stop thinking about it. I played this game when I was an early teenager. I know it won't have the same effect on you if you play it now in your adult life when you've seen far worse, but again, in terms of a formative experience, the Gribbler screaming bloody murder on your face in a very detailed full motion video sequence, by the way, not something with the very dated in-game graphics, might I add. It still moves something visceral within me to this day. It's still that effective on poor old me. That's my entry for number 2. The mother effing Gribbler. Stupid name too. What does Gribbler even mean? It has no right being as scary as it is. Screw you, Gribbler.
Yeah. My number 2 is from Thief Deadly Shadows. It's the infamous The Cradle.
The Shalebridge Cradle. It used to be an insane asylum, and before that, it was an orphanage. One night a fire started, no one knows how, and after that, they left the place abandoned. If there's a way to cram more misery into one building's history, I can't think of it.
Have you played the game?
No.
Yeah, The Cradle is the second to last level from it. And in case you know, Thief is about this thief who...
Yes, I know that much. I know that the thief is named Gareth.
Yeah, I'm just explaining to the audience. And, well, the Cradle is this orphanage in the city that has orphanage/asylum that has burned down. And
I think I know where this is going.
Everyone is staying clear of that place because people who go there don't tend to return back. Garrett has to go there to look for this ghost of a girl who used to live there. And the building, when he enters there, well, it's completely empty. There's usually in these levels there has been some enemies walking about, but in here there's no one. And it's very eerie when you go there and see all that burned stuff.
I can imagine.
What isn't burned, there's this lonely painting at the attic of this young girl, which is in good condition. And for the longest time I was just aimlessly wandering around the place because I didn't have the nerve to approach that painting because I swear I saw it move. The girl who was murdered there is in the painting, and you need to kind of get her out of her spirit to get out of there because it has been imprisoned in the painting. And at some points you are able to travel this mirage of the asylum's past. There are these mirages of the asylum staff who are walking around the places, and if you get caught of them, you exit the place. And you need to get kind of some sort of keys that are in the lowest basement level, and there are enemies. Some kind of former asylum inmates who are now cursed to wander around the places, and there are freaky movements and scream a lot and look frightening.
That sounds like a good time.
It seems that the Cradle itself is a malicious entity. The building itself has its own will, and once you spend enough time there, you realize that you can't get out. And the only way to get out is to travel to the past and jump out of a window. But the thing is that if you get caught now in the past, then you remain in there forever. That's the Cradle.
Again, that sounds like such a good time. This is why I don't play stealth games.
Yeah, it's very nerve.
Okay. Now, before we jump into the number one spookiest moment from non-spooky games ever, let's have a bit of a round to celebrate some...
honorable mentions?
Let us have some honorable mentions, yes. Matti, I know you've had quite an extensive list on your hand. Even though I've only asked for your top 10, you did a top 70?
Yeah, I have to. I look from the list of all the games that I own, and then when I'm thinking of which is more scary than which, then I have to, of course, need to arrange them in order so I can know which is top.
You've done way too much work for this. Way too much work, Matti.
Yeah.
Give us a couple of your honorable mentions.
Yeah, there are some legitimate entries, and in the bottom tier there are some humor choices. I don't know if it triggers something in you, but Nelson's Love Nest.
Nothing at all.
Stupid invaders.
I wouldn't call that scary, just very, very, very odious.
Okay, well, I can mention a couple of legitimately scary stuff. Well, there's the final hours from Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and
I would just say the moon. The moon is scary.
Yeah, and there's the Sorrowing Meadow from Dust and an Elysian Tale.
I'm sure.
Yeah, there's also from Half-Life 2 Episode 1 is waiting for the final elevator ride from the tunnels. Pitch black thing, and all headcrab zombies are running towards you, and you have to defend yourself until the elevator has arrived at the bottom floor.
That's just Tuesday for Mr. Freeman.
Yeah. I have also from Half-Life 2 Episode 2 the first Hunter battle encounter. First time you battle hunters, there's a very intense moments when these unusually aggressive new type of enemies that scream a lot. manage to be rather precise in their shots.
Nothing is scarier than that one scene from Half-Life Episode 3 in which the G-Man turns out to be one of the aliens from Stupid Invaders in disguise.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. There are also bombed Reims from Valiant Hearts, The Great War. That's rather nightmarish. And there's, speaking of nightmares, there's a Nightmare Battle from Metroid Fusion. And also there are this one specific stealth mission from Beyond Good and Evil, which is...
well, I wouldn't call them scary. Just, why did you think this was a good idea? That's what I would call them. I would yell this to the developers when they're not too busy abusing their stuff, that is.
Yeah. And a bit of a surprising from No One Lives Forever 2, there's this Antarctica base. Kind of similar to Cradle, and it's mostly abandoned, and then there's suddenly this one strong enemy that chases you throughout the level.
I played the first one. The first No One Lives Forever. I like the atmosphere in the subaquatic level.
No One Lives Forever.
Come to think of it, why even do a sequel to No One Lives Forever? Miss Archer in that game has been both under the sea and in space. Where else can you go from there? Alright, so that's it for the honorable mentions. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the first choice in both of our lists. I cannot wait to hear what your first choice was.
Well, my first choice is from A Hat in Time.
Oh! The Haunted Mansion. I have completely forgotten about that. That's my top 11. Okay? That's a good, suspenseful level in the game. Good game, by the way.
Yeah.
But that Haunted Mansion, woof! Unexpectedly terrifying, considering.
Yeah, basically it's my number one because of how big of a contrast it's to the rest of the game. That is kind of this...
Oh, remember the gargoyles that would chase you everywhere? And you basically cannot escape them right before you enter the mansion? Boy, I hated those. And I am personally a big fan of the boss fight in that particular world and level of the game. The boss of the area, that is. It has quite a banger for a soundtrack. It's the one I used for the opening credits of mine and Davar's Mad Play Let's Play series. But yes, the Haunted Mansion, that might be one of the best haunted mansions in video games of all time.
Yeah, every platformer has this obligatory scary level, and...
They usually tend to be more annoying than scary, because they force you to play by the rule, and it's usually some sort of unbearable gimmick. For example, you have to look at the booze to stop them from advancing. I had never enjoyed that in Super Mario. But I would say that in A Hat in Time, it's a gimmick, yes. It is completely different from the rest of the game, but it works because it's effectively scary.
My heart was racing so bad.
You are a literal child who has to hide under a bed in order not to be found by the scary boogeyman roaming the house.
Yeah, otherwise he turns you into an ice statue.
That's unpleasant.
Yeah.
So yes, A Hat in Time is a 3D platformer that only occasionally sends me into a fit of rage.
Yeah, it seems like a kiddish game, though it's not really aimed for kids. It aims for people who were kids 20 years ago. So it has kind of an...
So basically children on the inside.
Yeah, well, it has kind of an edge to it, so adults can be entertained.
Speaking of good, cult classic 3D platformers that have an edge to them, see how synergetic this is. We can segue to my number one entry. which is about Psychonauts.
Oh.
Psychonauts, baby! Recently, Psychonauts 2 was released.
Yeah,
and
I have yet to play it.
It's good!
Yeah,
It's
I've
so
heard.
good! I love it. It's good in a way that a 15 years old late sequel to a cult classic that had its own set of problems back in the day has absolutely no right to be. But it is. I think it's a better game than the original. It is more ambitious with its narrative and its themes. It looks absolutely spiffy too. I think it is the full realization of the raw potential that the first game had demonstrated, but without all the limitations, both imposed by technology at the time and also crunch. Because the first Psychonauts, as much as we both like it, I'm sure, it had...
It's the greatest game I've ever played.
Okay, wow. Well, I would say that, but then we get to the tower climbing scene with the mad rats after you and the bad camera angles, and then you get to the carnival of meat, and I have nothing but pain and sorrow etched into my body. It is the moment in which I stop having fun with Psychonauts, and I wish it ended earlier. So, with all that preamble out of the way, Psychonauts is a game about going inside people's minds and rearranging said minds for your convenience in order to advance in the plot. Which sounds very messed up if you think about it, and that's because it is. I think the second game acknowledges that. Since you get to navigate into people's minds, you go through the metaphorical representations of their traumas and mental illnesses, anxieties. The game is notoriously very creative with it. It is also very sneaky sometimes. Because the moment that I have chosen to put in my number one spot, it's a moment in this game that most people might not even get to experience in their first playthroughs, since it's technically an Easter egg. I am talking about Mila's secret.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, he knows that. He knows
Yeah,
about what I'm talking about. There is a secret hidden compartment inside the mind, the third mind in the game that you get to visit, which again is the mind of Mila, or Mia, as it is pronounced in the second game, whom is one of the top Psychonauts in the Psychonauts universe. Your teacher, effectively. And you get to go inside her mind, which is presented to you as this joyous, festive discotheque world. It's all a good time. That is, until you fumble, perhaps by accident, inside the hidden room, the little compartment in her mind that you were not supposed to find, in which you learn about her backstory. There is this quiet little room that looks like a children's room, with a toy box. And there is a memory vault over there which you open and you find out about Mila's traumatic experience. Which, well, speaking of synergy, still involves an orphanage and children.
It's always the orphanages.
It's also a bit of a leitmotif, isn't it? Inevitably. So you find out the truth about her and then you go inside the toy box.
Now you definitely don't want to go in there. That's a party killer right there.
Mila, where are you? Why did you let us die?
And this is all optional, by the way. This isn't something that you have to do in order to progress in the story. Like I said, it is all an Easter egg. Inside the toy box, which I just realized sounds like the premise for The Binding of Isaac, you descend into hell. Or rather, you find yourself into a hellish room where the embodiments of her trauma are stuck trapped behind mental bindings, I would call them. And you can hear them yelling and also whispering, "Where are you, Mila? Why did you let us die, Mila?" Over and over and over and over again. Psychonauts is a fun comedy game until it decides not to be one.
Yeah.
I have played entire legitimate horror games that are not half as blood-freezing and effective as this one Easter egg from Psychonauts. And that is why it's my number one choice for this list. Any of the other choices in this list don't even come close to how much this had impacted me.
Yeah.
This Easter egg, this surprise, this optional content that I discovered by accident. I'll never forget it. As good as Psychonauts 2 is, and it is very good, it still doesn't have a moment like this. I don't think any game will ever have a moment this effective ever again.
Unless there is an Easter egg in that game too.
Considering that I've completed it,
Okay.
I don't think there is, but I could be wrong. Okay, well, when I said completed it, I mean I've gotten pretty much everything except for every single last remaining figment. And I'm talking about 2 or 3 figments left, because I wasn't about to go comb the entire cerebrum of the entire world to get that achievement. I clocked out at a 101 rank. I sincerely doubt there's an Easter egg like that in Psychonauts 2. Anyway, I guess that does it for our top 10 scary moments from non-horror video games. Huh.
Yeah.
This was quite a journey, wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah.
So I hope you have enjoyed this diversion into your daily dilly-dallying in the month of Halloween. Do you have any final statements, Matti?
Go sleep in peace if you can.
You silly twat. This has been Madhog the Master, and this other guy has been Matti Mali, or I guess Count Matryoshka. Too many T's. It's a bit of a mouthful. And we shall bid you a lovely, restful good night. Are you going to insert your jump scare here, or... I hate you.